I'm going to pass on now to Mark Hopkinson, who was recently a councillor, a Labour councillor in Thanet. Mark joined the Labour Party as part of the Corbyn wave, and he stood in 2019 for election primarily to push for a community wealth building agenda at Thanet District Council. I don't know whether you can say anything about that, Mark. I've done quite a lot of reading about the Preston community wealth building experiment or initiative, so it would be good if you do say something about that. Mark quit the party on principle last week, and we'll discuss his reasons for doing so, as well as how this decision fits in with the left's predicament today. So welcome, Mark. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks very much, Esther, and thanks for this invitation. Generally, thanks to Christine for inviting me to speak here today. So I just sort of have two things I'd try and talk through. One is, my story and, partly why I quit the Labour Party last week, but also just started off with some general reflections on where the left is today. I'll try and keep my story relatively brief because, for one thing, I'm sure it's going to sound very familiar to a lot of people here, which, as you said, Esther, I joined the party. I didn't even vote Labour before 2015, let alone think about being a member or a councillor. And it's the inspiration of the Corbyn wave that I felt like this is the first time we're seeing an actual chance for real change and meaningful politics in mainstream politics. I'm sure that's familiar for everyone else here. So I joined the Corbyn wave, campaigned for the general election 2017, decided to stand in 2018. I decided to stand to become a councillor locally, and obviously 2018 we were still in a period of real optimism, I think, for the left in parliamentary politics. So I was the main thing which inspired me was, apart from the general sort of positivity of the Corbyn movement, was a talk I went to from Neil McEnroy, who's heavily involved in the Preston model and on the community wealth building. So I ran a campaign of trying to get, I ran that by an individual campaign along with other Labour councillors. Well, it was my particular thing, the community wealth building. So, I live in Thanet, and this is the constituency. We've got the embarrassment of being the only council in the country that, the only time UKIP have ever controlled a council, they took over in 2015 for a ran for Parliament here in the seat. And I was part of the Labour group that we managed to sort of reduce them to sort of, relevance in the council. So I did run a community wealth building. So we managed to get it kind of, we only really got symbolic agreement with the community wealth building. There wasn't really enough support from the leadership of that Labour group. Like all councils, they've been through 10 years of austerity at this point, and we're running a sort of threadbare service. Officers highly stressed and overworked, and also really crucially, COVID hit as well. And the council, we weren't in a position really to do anything meaningful with it. But I will return back to it in a second, actually. I mean, since 2019, obviously that pretty traumatizing result in 2019, in December, the election result, that's sort of second part of my time as a Labour member, I suppose, really. And really since then, I've been weighing up, when to leave. And, I finally decided to leave last week, but I won't dwell on this because we're all familiar with the sort of Starmer's hits of, best hits of, like just appalling integrity-free politics. But, the general Corbyn bashing, the attempt to erase the actually highly popular and successful 2017 manifesto, where we saw Labour have their best leap forward between two elections since the Second World War. That's just trying to be erased now. The media consensus is now that didn't happen, but it did happen. And we do have to hold on to that and remember that. Expulsions for liking groups that were not prescribed at the time. Black and white lying from Starmer. I never said, yes, I support nationalisation. No, I never said that. I won't go through the list because we know all of these things. There's a long list. Denial, pointless denial that Amnesty International, SLN's findings that Israel's an apartheid state, or etc. We know there's a long list of things like this. The reason that what the sort of trigger point for me in a way in a way was arbitrary. And I've never felt like I'm sure about I've never really felt sure, should I stay in the party or not? And I still don't in a way. But I think we're in this general uncertainty in the left as a whole. But the reason I did quit, and I'll actually just put this in the chat if people want to look at it later on. This is the statement I put out locally for why, and I talked about the statements from Starmer, but actually in a way, particularly from Angela Rayner last week, that she does support the tagging of asylum seekers, not because of she wasn't asked, if they're committing criminal offences that people can already get tagged for, but just in general, do you support this? And to see her, we're very used to Starmer giving voice to completely integrity-free answers that he blatantly doesn't actually personally believe in. But seeing Rayner do this as well was a sort of real turning point for me. Not just because it's such a sort of appalling, pointless policy in terms of what they're talking about for the people affected by asylum seekers who could potentially be tagged just for being asylum seekers, but what this means for the sort of broader politics of the UK generally. It really matters what Labour politicians are saying about asylum seekers, not just because of the asylum issue, but because of its significance, I think, for the general political climate. So we've obviously, had 10 years of austerity that's put working people under incredible pressure, and that has just been ramped up and is being intensified all the time through the cost of living crisis. The centre is not going to hold. Labour might win this, will probably win this next election, but in a very real way, the centre's not going to hold because working people need some other kind of solution, and people are more and more desperate. And that means, if there's going to be a change, it's going to be to the right or the left. And the riots in Knowsley last week, the racist anti-asylum riots in Knowsley last week, one vision of where working people, can go as a response to this. They're rightly, just totally disenchanted with people like Starmer and the centre of politics. So it's not just about the policy in itself. It's what does it mean for and Rayner both saying, they support. They triangulate on this policy and say, they obviously try and say there's slightly progressive things, but they're also willing to chuck in their just pointlessly racist things like, we would tag asylum seekers just because they're trying to triangulate and please people instead of speaking from a point of integrity or politics like that. So that's behind. You can read about my statement in more detail if you want to at some point. But I'll try and wrap up quickly. But I just wanted to talk about, regardless of my story, my reasons for leaving, three sort of areas of sort of terrain of like where the left can fight today. And one of those being parliamentary party politics, the other one being trade unions and strikes, and the other one not really separate to those, but just a general sort of ideological decision that people in this country are having to make now about what is the alternative to a completely vacuous centrist politics. In terms of parliamentary politics, in one way, I'd say right now, today, there's very little the left can actually try and do, given that the grip that the Labour bureaucrats and the right of the party have over the party and like controlling selections and so forth. I'm not saying nothing, but it's almost a sort of dead battleground for the left. But I do think one point worth making is it's worth thinking now about how that terrain is going to change once we do have a Labour government. I think the left will be able to argue from a very different sort of position. Now we have this just media consensus, Starmer's the sort of golden boy of politics, putting the world right again for the sort of, Westminster media sort of perspective. But that's going to be different. When Labour are a government, the left will be able to speak with a critical voice that the public will, I think, be more open to in some ways. But having said that, there are still things. I'd say I've quit the party, but there are good reasons to stay in and fight. I'm not here to argue people should leave the party. Regionalism, where there is power in the party, there are still things. Preston obviously is a really good example of that, where you have Labour in Manchester. I know Andy Burnham's not exactly the furthest left candidate, but he's certainly further to the left from Starmer. What he does show is that where there is localisation of power, there is more scope to try and fight for things within the Labour Party. But one other big question is, another political party. And, you know, for me, the question is, well, why has it not happened? Why is there not another political party? And I think in some ways, we're very uncertain, really, I think, in the left generally about this question about Labour. And I'm not trying to speak from a position of, I know what should happen in terms of the Labour Party, but we are still in this period of uncertainty. So just some reflections on that. The trade union and the strike issue is, of course, very different from the political party ones in the sense that it's absolutely very much alive for the reasons that very much alive as a terrain for the left to fight on now. You know, Pam listed all the sectors on strike. We know all about this, but I'll leave, you know, that's more for Ian and Louise to talk about, perhaps from that point of view. I do think, you know, there is also just this general, I don't want to oversimplify it as a binary choice, but, you know, working people in this country do have almost a sort of binary choice. Well, what do you do if you totally despair at centrist politics? You know, because we know there are right-wing forces out there, far right-wing forces out there that are trying to take hold in working class communities. And, you know, we've got to think about how we are also another force. That can be in political parties, it can be in trade unions, but it can also be social media campaigning. There are other terrains to explore. I think that's something else for us to think about and hold on to. I mean, just there's plenty of examples, but, you know, Just Stop Oil, the General Enough is Enough campaign. I don't know if people saw this viral clip recently on Politics Live. Gary Stevenson, who does economics, he's trying to speak from a working class voice as someone who's been a really successful trader in the city, but is trying to highlight the massive transfer of wealth in our society. He talks about 700 billion being transferred to the wealthiest, not intentionally as an intentional policy, but that has happened, he argues, since COVID. And he wants to sort of, he argues for this sort of economic education generally of the working class. And he does it from a non-party political point of view. So it's just another thing to think about. So yeah, just those are just some thoughts for me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. A lot of really interesting things in there. I think the issue in your article about public having been sold the myth of austerity is really important in the context of the pay struggle and the strikes, because if people really think that by paying workers more, the economy will somehow shrink or be disadvantaged, that's a major understanding that needs to be challenged. I think it's the point about the mission, whereby in the mission there is nothing about equality. It's all about growth, and it's all focused on the trickle-down theory of growth, which is absolutely not something the Labour Party should be promoting. And I think looking at it from a local government perspective, that ability, we've got an extremely centrist approach to local government at the moment. So if local authorities had some discretion, for example, to stop right to buy, or to implement a property tax instead of council tax and those sorts of things, there would be generally more grassroots power to the people as well. So thank you very much for all of those observations, and I hope that we'll be able to come back to some of those in the discussion later.